Members, the amendments on page 268 to 266 to 268 have been moved to Article 11. Members, the next amendment is on page 269. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Niave Criado.
The chair recognizes Ms. Niave Criado to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. Diversity, the condition of having or being composed of differing elements. Equity, freedom from bias or favoritism. Inclusion, to take in or comprise as a part of a whole or group. Members, today I ask you, which of these three oppose our purpose? Which of these three threaten our triumphs? Our purpose to elevate our state to its highest fulfillment, to its greatest destiny? Which of these three threaten our triumphs? The diversity of our state has made Texas a beacon for economic development. The equity evident from the transformations we have led from this very chamber, from our classrooms to our courtrooms, has ripened the fields of opportunity. In inclusion, we find security. Security to start a family and settle down, to throw down roots from Amarillo to Galveston. And today, we have a choice to make. Before us now is a fork in the road. We can vote to defund public colleges that honor the diversity of our communities. We can vote to strip funding from young people trying to get ahead in life, trying to pull themselves up from their bootstraps, simply because they acknowledge that our differences make us stronger. Students who had bravery to travel to this Texas Capitol with righteous indignation. We can muzzle our professors and force blinders on our students to prevent them from seeing themselves and their peers as they are. But we are better than that. This chamber is better than that. Our values are stronger than our weaknesses. We can choose to honor all the elements that make our Texas the strongest state in the union. We can choose to write in our laws the justice that follows generations of forced racial isolation. DEI policies loosen the pains of poverty for thousands of college students and elevate our public universities to become centers of intelligent Socratic discourse. We have come a long way since the days when Mexican and Black students were legally prohibited from receiving an education alongside their peers. DEI policies provide our Tier 1 research universities with billions of dollars every single year in federal research funds, funds that keep Texas at the forefront of discovery, of scientific innovation and exploration. And eliminating DEI initiatives leaves our state at an economic disadvantage and dulls our competitive edge nationally. Texas is strongest when our institutions of higher education reflect the makeup of our public schools. Texas businesses enjoy peak innovation when creativity and diversity flourish. Our state is best described by the book of Revelation, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations tribes, peoples, and tongues standing before the throne. This great multitude of people count on us to do right by them. This great multitude of tribes has chosen us to do right by their children, to count their triumphs as our victories, to mourn their losses and as our own. We have to come out of a great tribulation, and we cannot return to the wilderness.
Ms. Morales, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, will the representative yield for some questions?
Does the representative yield for questions?
I do.
She yields.
Representative Nave Criado, thank you so much for this amendment. It is so important. And I wanted to ask you, would you say that Rider 61, as written and without your amendment, infringes on the Civil Rights Act of 1964?
Yes, it does. And I'll share one example of where it violates Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. The law states that the denial of language services to English learners or people with limited English proficiency is a violation. Without this amendment, colleges and universities will have no choice but to deliberately ignore language services for fear of being quote unquote inclusive. Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a stepping stone for all in the United States, not just people of color. It prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, sex, religion, and national origin. So DEI programs are put in place to ensure that there's no discrimination in hiring, promoting, or firing of people representing these groups.
Thank you. And there's a quote from Mark Twain that says, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme." Would you agree that this DEI prohibition without your amendment,
Members, please take your conversations outside the rail.
would you agree, let me start over. There's a quote from Mark Twain that says, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme." Would you agree that this DEI prohibition without your amendment takes us backwards to battles fought in this chamber decades ago?
Unfortunately, yes. In 66 years ago, in the second called session of the 55th legislature, priorities were laid out to pass segregation laws, and in this same chamber in 1957, members of the House voted 115 to 26 to pass a bill giving the governor and school boards the power to immediately close any school where federal troops might be sent to enforce integration. They voted to close schools rather than integrate, and I think folks can draw their own conclusion about what's happening here.
Thank you so much. I support you in this amendment.
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, will the lady yield for questions?
Will the lady yield for questions?
I do.
She yields.
Thank you so much, Representative Nieve Criado. Were you aware that public schools, public universities in the state of Texas did not even legally admit black students until the 1960s and 70s in Texas?
Yes.
And I know that seems like a really long time ago, but for me, that was maybe just a few years or maybe just a decade before I was even born. That's within our lifetimes. Would that be fair?
Yes.
And when we talk about DE&I, we're not just talking about ethnic or racial issues, are we?
You're correct. There's a wide variety of issues, veterans, people with disabilities.
And let's talk a little bit about that. One of the main points of DE&I programs is to look out for whether there are intentional discriminations and sometimes unintentional discriminations. Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair.
In fact, there may be things that a university might be doing that they're not even aware is causing an unintended discrimination against someone. Would that be fair? That's something that they do?
Yes.
Okay. And especially in relation to people who are disabled, especially in relation to our veterans who may have special needs due to their service, due to their trauma, due to their injuries. They may often get overlooked in the services that a university provides. Would that be fair?
That's fair. It's so important to have members and individuals from those different backgrounds at the table to be able to guide the universities and the policies so that they're not discriminatory.
Absolutely. It's not enough to just say, dear veterans, we're not going to intentionally discriminate against you, but yet leave in place all the things that unintentionally discriminate against them. Would that be fair?
Yes, that's correct.
So, in service to all of our people, that include people of color, that include people in minority communities, that include people of religious minorities, that include people of different physical abilities, that include people who have service histories that brought them into the line of fire, that caused them to be injured, that caused them to have differing medical conditions. It is incumbent upon us to make sure that not only do we not intentionally discriminate against them, but that all our institutions are fair. Would you agree with that?
That's correct.
And more than just fair, but equal. That we treat them equally, right?
Precisely.
That is where the E in DEI comes from, right?
Yes.
We want equality. We want equity for all of our people, not giving any one group an advantage, but to say we will treat all students, all staff equally. That is the goal of this organization, and that is the goal of our university. Would that be fair?
That's absolutely fair. We must overcome decades of past discrimination to get to our state to the place that it deserves to be.
And if our schools do not make sure that all students are treated equally, that all university staff are treated equally, we will have a harder time recruiting, won't we?
We're already seeing and hearing concerns from higher ed professors and others that this is absolutely going to impact our state's recruitment efforts.
The lady's time's expired.
We move to extend.
Mr. Speaker, I move to extend the lady's time.
Mr. Wu moves to extend the lady's time. Is there objection? Chair has none so ordered.
Ron Reynolds up next.
Mr. Wu, for what
Mr. Speaker,
purpose?
would the lady yield for questions?
Will the lady yield for questions?
I do yield.
She yields.
And would you agree with me that Texas is an extremely diverse state?
Texas is, yes, we have the state with the largest population that has been fueled by Latino growth. It's the state with the largest population of African Americans in the entire nation. Our AAPI communities are growing at a high rate, absolutely.
And in fact, did you know that the Asian community in the state of Texas is the fastest growing community in the state?
Yes, and that's something that we're proud of.
And even within, let's just say, the Asian community itself, there is incredible diversity within that community. Would that be fair?
Yes, that's fair.
And there's incredible diversity within the Latino community, right?
Yes, we have folks from all backgrounds.
And it's important for us and important for our schools to not only recognize this diversity, but make sure that everyone from every group feels like they have a place in this world. Would that be fair?
Absolutely, and that's why we need to strike this rider to ensure that our budget reflects the moral values of our state, and that is that we believe that diversity is a good thing, that it's not a bad word that it's become in this House.
And so if we delete our university's ability to include people to make sure that we recognize and value their diversity and that we're inclusive of them, this will diminish our competitive ability. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. And we want to make sure Texas is the most competitive state in the nation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Mr. Wu to speak in favor of the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, members, I posed this original rider when it was in the Appropriations Committee, and I am standing here in support of this amendment to take it off of our budget. And the reason, I think, needs to be stated very clearly, that while there's a lot of people out there who think that the DE&I programs are some kind of like this nebulous, abstract type of feel-good concept, these are actually very important offices. The most important role that they play is to make sure that everyone has a fair shot. Not an upper hand, not a special consideration, but to make sure that it's fair for everyone. Whether that person, that student, or that professor, or a staff member, whether they're black and from the inner city, whether they're white and from rural communities, whether they're an injured veteran, whether it's somebody who's disabled, whether it's somebody with special needs, whether it's a person who's blind, whether it's a person who has hearing impaired. It makes sure that we all have a fair shot. What is wrong with diversity? Look at this body. We are diversity. We all have something to contribute. We all have something valuable about ourselves. And when we come together, we add that diversity, add that difference to this body, and that's how we're able to do so many things, because we have different people who have different ideas and different experiences. Those are valuable things. Diversity is valuable. The concept of equality, of equity, I can think of few American values more important than equity. To come here, to be a part of a government that stands for the idea that we are all created equal, that we should all be treated equally no matter who we are, what our differences are, and what we want to achieve. The premise of American democracy is based on the idea of equality, that there is no king, that there are no princes, that there are no queens, that we are all equal under the law no matter who we are. Equity is valuable. And the concept of inclusion. The concept of inclusion is especially important, I think, especially for the people who stand around me right now. There's many of us here that in the years past, we would not have been allowed to be in this position. It wasn't that long ago that Black and Latinos were not even allowed to be admitted into public universities. It wasn't that long ago that we were forbidden from doing certain things. It wasn't that long ago that Chinese people were forbidden from owning land. And yet, we persevered and we fought and we demanded a place at the table. We were included. And now, in this effort to push back DE&I, what we're saying is all you people here who now have a place at the table, all these communities who fought and bled and sometimes even died to have a seat at the table, we are now being told, get up and leave. Leave this table, you are no longer included. And I won't stand for that, and I know a lot of people won't either. We refuse to get up from this table. We refuse to go back under. We refuse to get the scraps. We want our diversity to matter. We want us to be equal, and we want to be included. And this is something that is worth our time, not only in this body, but in our society as a whole, that we should strive for all of these things. And by getting rid of this in our highest academic institutions, we are saying to the world, Texas is no longer a welcoming place.
The chair recognizes Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I am in support of Chairwoman Neave's amendment, which strikes Rider 61, the prohibition of unconstitutional diversity, equity, and inclusion programs or practices. You know, I remember the words of Dr. King that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And my colleagues are right. It was just in recent years, that African Americans and Hispanics were able to attend these public colleges and universities because of the history of white supremacy, because of the history of racism and discrimination that didn't end until the end of Jim Crow was struck down. It wasn't until then that we had an openness for African Americans to attend these universities. And here we are today, unfortunately in 2023, seeking to take away the little progress that we've made. We've made some marginal progress because of these diverse equity and inclusion programs. What we should be doing, members, is strengthening them. We should be adding additional resources because when you look at the disparities that exist still within our Tier 1 universities, there are very few minorities that are represented on faculties. There are very few students that are represented. So we're still just trying to catch up for that long history of discrimination. DEI programs extend far beyond race. They take into account gender, sexual orientation, disabilities, veteran status, and other underrepresented identities. And for the record, some people may know that based on the 2020 census, there are more African Americans in Texas than any other state in this country. We should be embracing that diversity. Our diversity is our strength. What kind of message are we sending to the record number of African Americans? What kind of message are we sending to Hispanics and Asians and people with disabilities? The message is loud and clear. You're not welcome in Texas. We want your money, but we don't want you at our universities. That is the wrong message. Why are we trying to be on the wrong side of history when we've overcome many of the ills that our country once grappled with? There is no reason for us to go back to those dark days, but that is what we're doing. When Governor Abbott pronounced this out of the blue, out of nowhere in February, during Black History Month, it was an insult to many of the African Americans and other minorities in this state. I haven't heard my phone ringing so much from my constituents that were outraged. What is going on? Why are we doing this? What is happening? This is wrong. Research demonstrates that colleges' diversity courses have positive impacts on college students' cognitive development in the realms of critical thinking and intellectual engagement, since they are exposed to a myriad of different perspectives from different groups. That is the benefit. That helps us to end stereotypes and stigmas. It is not what Texas is about. And one of the main reasons why thousands of students choose to attend our colleges and universities is because of the diversity. Are we saying we want the African American students on our colleges for football and basketball and track, but not in our classrooms? Is that the message that we're sending? Rider 61 is an attempt to do away with all of the wonderful aspects of DEI, claiming that they are not unconstitutional. The truth of the matter is that they are initiatives that are working. And in fact, the federal government embraces this. The U.S. Department of Education embraces this. There's been no ruling by a U.S. Supreme Court against it. I encourage my colleagues to think about what we're doing and all of the good that DEI has brought to this state, making Texas one of the fastest growing states, not one of the fastest growing states in the country, the 9th largest economy in the world. Those dollars, ladies and gentlemen, are the majority of the citizens that happen to be majority minority. Now, finally, I just want to say that each and every one of us stands on the shoulders of those who came before us, those who fought so tirelessly and gave their lives to end Jim Crow in this state. But with policies like this, it opens up old wounds. It triggers feelings of inferiority, and it triggers sentiments of white supremacy. And I'm asking members to vote against this, to be on the right side of history, to do the right thing, and stand with us in this diverse body. I ask you to support Representative Chairwoman Niave's amendment because our diversity is our strength. Be on the right side of history. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Mr. Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members and colleagues that are standing up here at the podium with me. Many of the comments that I was going to make certainly have been said, certainly from a statistical perspective. What I'd like to do is give you the second part of what I was going to talk about, and that's the personal story. Some of you have heard me say that several dates that many folks remember is the day they got married, which is a smart thing to do, and the other one is the day, if they were veterans, the day they enlisted. The day they enlisted in the service. The day I enlisted in the service was March the 23rd, 1968. For those of you that are trying to do the math, I'm 73 years old. I was 18 years old at that time, and I was getting out of high school. I was a senior in high school. I didn't have a way to go up. I didn't have a way to get out. I had to do something to make sure that I could try to secure my future as best I could, as best as my family could afford. My parents did not go to high school. Middle school, elementary school were their levels of accomplishment. I knew I wanted to do better. They wanted me to do better. And I knew that my way forward was by getting in the military. When I got out of the military, I immediately made sure that I took advantage of every opportunity that I had, whether it was the GI Bill and today's version of it, which is a Hazelwood that takes on a lot of the family members of veterans. Those are the tools that are getting used by minorities to be able to get into the universities, to be able to get an education, to be able to break the cycle of poverty, to be able to know that there's an opportunity for them to succeed. If we don't give them that, if we don't give them a chance to sit at the table in the classrooms, then we're denying them that opportunity. That's why I stand before you today in support of this amendment. We must do that.
Mr. Speaker?
We must be able to secure
Ms. Garcia,
those
for what
kinds of...
purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
The gentleman yield for questions.
I would be honored for a question from you,
The
ma'am.
gentleman yields.
Thank you so much for your testimony and sharing your support of this initiative, Rep. Lopez. I too am a veteran, and I also remember very distinctly August 15th, 1995. I'll never forget that day as long as I live. And one thing that's so beautiful about that day, it was the first time that this Afro-Latina had freedom in her life. And I'm gonna tell you how that's possible. I grew up in a country where my being culturally ambiguous was a problem. You see, I'm not white enough for white people. I'm not black enough for black folks. I'm not Latina enough for Latinos. This is what I've experienced my entire life. I'm not a victim. Rest assured, I'm not a victim. I've triumphed greatly. At 19 years old, I got custody of my brother, who is a black man to this day, at this day. When I was leaving Germany and I had a choice of 5 states to move to, Florida, California, Louisiana, Missouri, Texas, I thought long and hard, where would I be accepted? Missouri, no go. Florida, I can pass for Cuban. However, I wanted someplace where my black brother could grow up proud. And because of that, I chose Texas. I chose a base that I could move to, where me, as an ambiguous woman of color, could live proudly with my children, where I could live proudly with my brother, where he wouldn't be called the N-word, where we wouldn't be called other horrible names that have to do with the Hispanic population, the black population, being biracial. My favorite thing I'm called is a half-breed. Me as a half-breed, I am not accepted. Period. Me as a half-breed represent the other biracial, multiracial people who have chose Texas as the place to thrive. Imagine my surprise, Mr. Lopez, as the only Afro-Latina woman veteran to serve in this House, to see that our very diversity, our very equity, and our very inclusion is being attacked. What do we say to that? Do you, sir, one veteran to another, would you agree that a restriction on DEI initiatives for higher education would negatively impact our military?
Would absolutely negatively impact it. 1 out of every 5 veterans is Hispanic. 11% of those veterans are women. Those are the people that you're affecting if we move forward with this type of discriminatory practice. Thanks for your comments. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. And not
Do you have any other
only do I stand here as a multiracial individual, woman veteran, I also stand as a mother to 2 black men with autism.
And proud of
2
it.
college-age black men with autism. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair recognizes Mr. Sherman to speak in favor of the amendment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I stand proudly to support Chairwoman Niave Cabrillo resolution. I have a speech, but I am just going to speak from what the priest said this morning in his prayer. He referenced in his prayer Acts 17, verse 28. For we live and move, for we have our very being from God. And text says that we are all made of one blood. You know, I get it. I get it. There are those who are saying that DEI is preferential treatment, that it hurts other groups. Because of DEI, they feel that it provides an unfair advantage for certain people. But that's the reason that we have DEI, is because we do have unfair biases in the marketplace and in everywhere. Scripturally speaking, we're always asking the Lord to answer our prayer. But we fail to answer Jesus' prayer. In John 17:21, he prayed that we would all be one as he and his Father are one. You know, we are in some really interesting times when we are saying that we do not even want to have a requirement that everyone be considered. Last month, the great NFL coach Tony Dungy was here, and many of you met him and took pictures with him. And Coach Dungy said, "I remember when the Rooney Rule was introduced. The Rooney Rule was introduced in 2003 because when they looked at the front office of the NFL and they looked at the coaching staff, they found that there was no diversity. They enacted the Rooney Rule in 2003, which simply said you had to interview at least one person of color. You only had to interview one person. The first year, over 20 years ago, when the Rooney Rule was introduced, we had no change. It took time, and now we have more diversity. But DEI is about providing merit opportunities for individuals that typically far exceed the best of the best. So we're not talking about a handout. We're simply talking about being righteous. You know, we have a history, and I'm not talking about as a country. I'm talking about biblically. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 38, the Bible says that when God led the children of Israel out of Egypt, he led them out, not only the children of Israel, but it was a mixed multitude. It was a mixed multitude. And when we get to Numbers chapter 12, verse 1, we find that there is a problem because Moses is married to a black woman, a Cushite. There are people who have a problem with diversity. I implore you, since I've been here, it's been really different from the local level where we talk to each other and we can change hearts and minds. All we need is 12 Republicans to stand with us that DEI is important, that it is important that we have diversity. We teach our children that it's important that they have a balanced meal. They need to have diversity on their plate. And God has created an ecosystem that is diverse.
Mr. Speaker,
It would not be sustainable.
Mr. Reynolds, for a purpose.
would the gentleman yield for some questions?
Would the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes, sir.
The gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Sherman. And I agree with what your sentiments are. You've referenced quite a few scriptures. Are you familiar with Proverbs 31, verse 8 and 9?
I am not exactly.
That scripture, it says to speak out for the one who cannot speak, for the rights of those who are doomed. Speak out, judge fairly, and defend the rights of oppressed and needy people. Do you think that we should apply that scripture to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to minorities, to underrepresented? Isn't that what God called us to do in Proverbs 31, 8, 9?
Representative Reynolds, Chairman, you're exactly right. Just as Micah 6 and 8 tells us that we should love justice, we should be looking for righteousness.
And Representative Sherman, are you aware that the Supreme Court has not ruled diversity, equity, and inclusion as unconstitutional? Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Are you aware that Texas has more African Americans than any other state in the United States of America?
Approximately 4 million, sir.
Are you aware that based on the 2020 census, that African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians make up a majority of the population of the state of Texas?
Yes, sir.
And are you aware that if we go forward without this amendment, if Rider 61 gets included in our budget, are you aware of the stigma that is going to have on the majority of the citizens in this state?
I am aware that it is grave, but I don't believe any of us realize the ramifications that this will have, economically speaking.
What kind of message with this amendment? What kind of message would it send to the African American and Hispanic communities in this state?
It clearly sends a message that whatever my hiring practices are, I want it to be universal.
And are you aware of any college or university that said that, hey, there's a problem with diversity, equity, and inclusion in the state. You guys need to remedy it. Have you heard of any problem of that sort from any university in this state?
No, sir. I have the only four-year state college in my district in Dallas, and they are one of the most diverse universities.
Thank you, Representative Sherman. I appreciate Chairwoman Victoria Nyabe for bringing this amendment.
Ms.
Mr.
Bowers,
Speaker,
for what purpose?
would the gentleman yield for a couple of questions?
Would the gentleman yield
Yes.
for questions?
Yes, sir.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Sherman. I'd just like to ask you a few questions because this issue really does hit home for me. Do you believe it is important that our diverse students are able to see themselves in their professors, faculty, and staff?
Do I believe that they're able to see?
That they should be able to?
Absolutely. It's proven that children perform better when they see someone who looks like them.
And do you believe that DEI initiatives can help students who are in the first in their family to attend college, who are disproportionately going to be students of color, feel more at home in their new environment?
Yes.
Were you aware that my daughter, Jade Bowers, is in the process of choosing where she will go to medical school?
I am.
Thank you. We are very proud of her, but were you aware that even at some of the most prestigious institutions that she's been accepted to, she still has the concerns of if she will get to learn from people that look like her and have life-shared experiences with her?
Yes.
Do you think that the quality of education can be affected by feeling accepted where you are?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time. I just had an experience of having to ask those very questions to those in places of making decisions at higher learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bowers. Mr. Speaker, I would just like to say to the House floor, with all due respect, a budget is a moral document. And what we've done is essentially say that our moral document now has a strong statement against diversity, equity, and inclusion. Jesus said in Matthew 6:21, where your treasure is, that's where your heart is. This is our moral document that we are including such a statement of exclusion.
Mr. Manuel, for purpose.
Does the gentleman saying that these hands answer some questions?
The gentleman's time has expired.
Okay.
With that,
Can we have an extension, Mr. Speaker?
Members, Mr. Manuel moves to extend the gentleman's time. Is the objection? Chair hears none, so ordered.
Representative, are we still currently living under the Voting Rights Act of 1964 here in Texas?
these are interesting times, sir.
Well, are we still under the law that says that because of past racism that's still in this state, that we have to have an electorate that is diverse,
Yes.
giving minorities an opportunity to have representatives that look like them here in the body?
Yes.
So don't you find it interesting that we still have to live under a federal law that says we have to be diverse because there's racism still in the state, but yet we're getting rid of diversity here in the state while the federal government says there are still problems of racism here in the state of Texas and in the South?
Yes, very much so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Speaker, I move close.
The chair recognizes Mrs. Weiner to speak for the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, members, I'll be brief. First, I want to address my fellow white folks in the room. We all know that the core reason behind attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs is because there is a fear that if people of color are more successful, that white people will be less successful. That is the core root of these attacks. And y'all, that's a lie. We are stronger together. We are stronger if everyone rises together. And so I want to challenge each of y'all to challenge those fears in yourself and in your own community so that we can be stronger as Texans. Second, I want to address y'all as a current student in a public university here in Texas. There's a lot of talk that issues with inadequate representation are in the past. But I sit at the University of Texas School of Law right now, and those issues of representation are still present every day. If I had been able to take a full load of classes my first year, I would have had 6 white professors and 2 non-white professors. Members, we all know that does not look like Texas. Every single one of us knows that. And that is in a school that has had the freedom to try to recruit diverse professors that look like the students they teach. And those challenges still exist in the student body as well. There are more white men named Jack in my section at University of Texas than black men. These problems still exist today. I ask you not to sweep them under the rug and instead support this amendment so that my classmates who have moved here to attend law school here in Texas don't regret their choice, because that's the conversation I'm hearing in the halls at the University of Texas right now. People wondering why they came here in a state that is attacking the diverse members of our student body and making it harder to recruit faculty that truly represent them. So members, I ask you to support Representative Neave's amendment.
The chair recognizes Ms. Jones of Harris to speak in favor of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hay estudiantes en Texas que no hablan ni entienden inglés, pero ellos necesitan ayuda a aprender inglés. Y también aprendí español en las escuelas públicas. Now, for people who don't understand me, there are people that don't speak English, and when they hear English spoken, they feel just like you did. And it is important that public universities and schools teach all people here in Texas. I learned Spanish. I'm from the hood. I'm not Hispanic, but the public schools in this state taught me to speak Spanish. And we owe the same thing to immigrants. But the thing that makes me really sad about all of this is when we think of DEI, people focus on race, the black race, the Hispanic race, when the truth is, there are a lot of other diversity that need help. I will tell you, my father went to Vietnam. When my father came back from Vietnam, there weren't opportunities for him as a traumatized veteran. They call it PTSD. I believe my dad had PTSD, and my dad came back after serving his country and fighting for our freedom, and he blew his brains out because there were not opportunities for him. That's important. So DEI is not just about black or brown. I have a friend who has 2 children with autism who need help in school. And with that help in school, they can be successful. And we have an opportunity, or I think we actually have an obligation, to provide reasonable accommodations to people who need help like that, because we should not sweep away people who have autism. I also think that there are people who are not as mobile as us, who are in wheelchairs. They need reasonable accommodations to be able to roll through the halls of our universities and our educational schools so that they can be law-abiding, productive, educated citizens in this great state of Texas. I have a cousin who is deaf. Schools had an obligation to teach him ASL so that he could communicate, because I know for a fact that my cousin was extremely upset that we couldn't speak to him where he could understand, because he could not always read lips. So everybody is not, I don't even know what perfect is. Everybody does not speak English. And oh, by the way, DEI has a lot to do with it. The fear of it is immigrants that come from the southern border. I don't hear people complaining about people coming from the northern borders or the people coming from European borders that don't speak English. They speak Italian and French and all those other Romance languages. And so we have an obligation to educate people who come here. And I stand with Chairwoman Neave Criado with this amendment, because racism is alive and kicking. And oh, by the way, people who are older need help. They need hearing aids when they're learning. So all I'm asking you to do is please see past the race that many people see, and understand that diversity comes in really different shapes, sizes, capabilities. And if we provide an education to everyone, then we're more likely to have Texans who are productive contributors to this society, and it will create generational wealth in education. And so whatever I need to do to be supportive of you, Chairwoman, I absolutely do it. De nada.
The chair recognizes Mr. Van Dever to speak in opposition to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I appreciate the spirited discussion on this amendment. However, I oppose the amendment and ask you to vote no. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Ms. Neave Criado to close on the amendment.
Move adoption.
The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment. A record vote has been requested by Ms. Isaac. A record vote has been granted. The clerk will ring the bell. Mr. Rosenthal voting aye. Mr. Reynolds voting aye. Mr. Busey voting aye. Ms. Lisa voting aye. Mr. Lopez voting aye. Mr. Van Dever voting no. Mr. Toth voting no. All members voted. There being 64 ayes and 83 nays, the amendment fails to adopt.